Dr. Eleanor Reed sat in her dimly lit laboratory, surrounded by humming machinery and stacks of research papers. The low buzz of the equipment had become a comfort to her during the endless nights of work. Eleanor was part of a small, underfunded team attempting to decode radio signals from deep space. For years, the data had yielded little but static and cosmic background noise, and funding was running thin. But tonight, something felt different. Her computer screen flickered as she adjusted the frequency on the massive dish antenna stationed miles away. A strange wave pattern appeared, a rhythmic pulse, distinct and deliberate. It was unlike anything she'd encountered before. Eleanor leaned closer, her heart pounding. "Is this it?" she muttered, adjusting the dials. The pulse grew louder through her headphones, a series of sharp clicks and low hums. Then, unmistakably, came a voice, a faint, garbled whisper that sent chills down her spine. Eleanor froze, listening intently as the voice repeated a single word. "Eleanor," her breath hitched. "What in the—" She yanked off her headphones and stared at the screen. No one outside her immediate team knew about this project, and she had no explanation for how her name could have been transmitted. She typed feverishly, isolating the frequency and recording the transmission. The voice continued, growing clearer with each passing second. "Eleanor, help us!" Over the next week, Eleanor became consumed by the signal. She listened to it on repeat, analyzing the waveforms and trying to decipher the voices. Her colleagues dismissed it as interference or a hoax, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. The voices began revealing things about her life, memories she'd buried. They spoke of her late father, recounting their fishing trips by the lake when she was a child. They mentioned the locket she wore, a family heirloom that had never left her neck. The specificity was unnerving, but she couldn't stop listening. One night, as she sat alone in her apartment, her television flickered on by itself. The screen displayed a distorted image of a room, sterile and clinical, with flickering fluorescent lights. A voice crackled through the speakers. "Find us!" Eleanor's heart raced as her computer screen suddenly filled with binary code. The lights in her apartment dimmed and the air grew cold. She reached out trembling and touched the monitor. The binary translated into coordinates. The coordinates led Eleanor to a remote forest several hours' drive from the city. Armed with a flashlight and her laptop, she followed the GPS to an unmarked dirt road that ended at a rusted steel door embedded in the hillside. The door bore no markings, only a keypad covered in grime. The voices whispered in her mind, guiding her fingers as she entered a sequence of numbers. The lock clicked and the door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint hum of old machinery. The bunker's interior was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and empty rooms filled with outdated equipment and discarded files. As she explored, she found a room that mirrored the one she'd seen on her television, clinical and cold, with a single chair bolted to the floor. The walls were lined with monitors, many of them still flickering with static. On a nearby table lay a journal. Flipping through it, Eleanor discovered that the bunker had been a government facility conducting experiments on psychic phenomena. The scientists had developed a machine to amplify brainwaves, allowing communication beyond the physical realm. But the project had been abandoned after a catastrophic event, an accident that had left the facility's personnel dead. "We were left behind," the voices murmured, echoing through the room. "We need you." As Eleanor delved deeper into the bunker's files, the machinery around her sputtered to life. Screens displayed distorted images of people, pale, spectral figures with hollow eyes. Their voices grew louder, no longer confined to her headphones or speakers. They filled the air, a cacophony of pleas and warnings. "You must finish what they started," one voice urged. "Complete the connection." Eleanor's laptop screen displayed schematics for the machine. Despite her fear, she felt an inexplicable compulsion to repair it. She scavenged parts from the facility, her hands shaking as she pieced the device together. The voices guided her, their whispers growing clearer with each step. When the machine was finally operational, it emitted a low hum that resonated through the bunker. Eleanor hesitated, her finger hovering over the activation switch. "What happens if I do this?" she asked aloud. The voices didn't answer. With a deep breath, Eleanor flipped the switch. The machine roared to life and the air around her shimmered like heat waves. The spectral figures began to take shape, their translucent forms flickering in and out of existence. One figure stepped forward, a man in a lab coat, his face gaunt and haunted. "We were trapped here when the machine malfunctioned," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Our consciousnesses were torn from our bodies. We've been in limbo ever since." "Why me?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. "Because you can hear us. You're the only one who can bridge the gap." As the figures became more solid, the bunker shook violently. Eleanor realized the machine was destabilizing the boundary between the physical and spectral realms. If she didn't shut it down, the consequences could be catastrophic. "You promised to help us!" the figures cried, their forms twisting in anguish. Eleanor's heart wrenched, but she knew what she had to do. She raced to the control panel and began dismantling the machine, ignoring the spectral hands reaching for her. With a final desperate pull, she yanked the power cable free. The bunker fell silent, the figures vanished, and the machinery powered down. Eleanor collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Eleanor emerged from the bunker as dawn broke over the forest. She felt hollow, haunted by the voices and the guilt of abandoning them. Back in her laboratory, she destroyed the recordings and wiped all traces of the frequency from her equipment. But late at night, when the world was quiet, she could still hear them, the faint whispers of the forgotten calling her name. Weeks passed, but Eleanor couldn't escape the pull of the voices. She began to notice strange phenomena around her, lights flickering in unison, the faint hum of the frequency sneaking into her dreams. Her colleagues reported odd malfunctions in the lab equipment, though they couldn't explain the cause. One evening, as she reviewed old files, a surge of static erupted from her speakers. The monitor displayed a familiar, haunting message. "You shut the door, but it's still open." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Her laptop powered off without warning, and the lights in her apartment dimmed to darkness. A soft, rhythmic tapping echoed from her living room. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward, her pulse quickening with each step. There, on the screen of her old television, was a single word: listen. The signal was back, stronger than ever, and this time Eleanor realized it wasn't asking for her help, it was demanding it. Eleanor began experiencing vivid hallucinations, glimpses of shadowy figures standing at the edges of her vision. She heard faint whispers even in crowded spaces, their disjointed words seeping into her thoughts. She tried to brush it off as stress, but the occurrences grew more sinister. One night, her bathroom mirror cracked spontaneously, the fractures forming a word: return. Her phone began receiving garbled text messages that she couldn't trace. When she tried to block the frequency, her equipment fried itself in a violent burst of sparks. Desperate for answers, Eleanor revisited the bunker. The door opened with a groan and a familiar chill enveloped her. Inside, the air was thick with an oppressive energy. The machinery had been inactive since her last visit, but now it was humming faintly, as if alive. A sudden surge of static filled the room. Monitors flickered, displaying grotesque images, twisted faces screaming silently, their eyes hollow and accusing. The voices screamed in unison, their anguish piercing her mind. "We trusted you!" Eleanor fell to her knees, clutching her head. "What do you want from—" The air inside the laboratory hummed with the static of radio equipment. Dr. Evelyn Harper sat hunched over her workbench, her fingers flying over the controls of the experimental receiver. The room was dimly lit, the pale glow of the monitor casting eerie shadows on the walls. Evelyn had spent years refining her equipment, hoping to decode signals from deep space, a calling that had consumed her life since childhood. Tonight, however, the signal she stumbled upon was unlike anything she had ever encountered. The receiver emitted a faint, oscillating tone. Evelyn adjusted the dials, narrowing the bandwidth. The tone grew clearer, resolving into a fragmented series of whispers, barely audible. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Voices, words danced at the edge of comprehension, as though reaching through layers of static to find her. This isn't possible," she muttered, recording the transmission. Evelyn leaned closer, straining to make out the words. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into a clear sentence. "Evelyn." She recoiled, her chair scraping against the floor. The voice was calm, deliberate, and unmistakably human. But how? Her receiver was calibrated to scan cosmic frequencies, not Earth-based transmissions. She adjusted the equipment again, dismissing the incident as a bizarre anomaly. But the voice came back. "You're closer than you think." Evelyn's hand trembled as she turned off the receiver. The room fell silent except for her pounding heart. She tried to rationalize the experience. Maybe it was a prank, a pirate signal from some tech-savvy trickster. She resolved to investigate in the morning, but sleep eluded her that night. The dark corners of her bedroom seemed to press closer, shadows writhing like living things. The next day, Evelyn returned to her lab, determined to analyze the recordings. As she played back the transmission, she noticed something chilling. The voice didn't just call her name. It mentioned specific details about her life, details no one should know. "Your mother's locket, you still keep it on the nightstand, don't you?" Her stomach churned. The locket was a private keepsake, one she never mentioned to anyone. Panic began to creep in, but curiosity overpowered her fear. She reactivated the receiver and tuned into the same frequency. The whispers resumed immediately. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. There was a pause, then a different voice answered, guttural and distorted. "You sought us out." The lights in the lab flickered. Evelyn's computer screen glitched, displaying garbled text that seemed to mirror the whispers from the radio. Her phone buzzed incessantly, but every attempt to answer was met with silence on the other end. The air grew colder, as though an invisible presence had filled the room. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cracking. "We are those who linger, forgotten, and you have opened the door." The signal cut off abruptly, plunging the room into an oppressive silence. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears. Whatever she had stumbled upon, it wasn't just a rogue signal, it was something far darker. In the days that followed, Evelyn became obsessed. She spent hours poring over the recordings, trying to decipher hidden patterns in the voices. Her equipment began malfunctioning inexplicably. Screens displayed ominous messages, "Help us, remember us," before shutting down completely. Lights flickered at odd intervals, and the air seemed to grow colder whenever she tuned into the frequency. It wasn't long before the voices began addressing her directly, more frequently, and with unnerving specificity. "You shouldn't have ignored your sister's call. She needed you." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Her estranged sister had called a week ago, but Evelyn hadn't answered, too absorbed in her work to deal with family drama. How could the voices possibly know that? "What do you want from me?" she screamed into the empty lab. "Truth," the voices replied in unison, their tone almost mocking. As her sanity frayed, Evelyn's research led her to a horrifying discovery. The frequency wasn't extraterrestrial, it originated from Earth. She traced its source to a decommissioned government bunker several miles away, a site rumored to have been used for classified experiments during the Cold War. Desperate for answers, Evelyn drove to the bunker late one night. The facility was a dilapidated shell, overgrown with vines and graffiti. But as she ventured deeper inside, the air became thick and suffocating, as if the building itself were alive. She found signs of recent activity, footprints in the dust, faint humming of powered equipment. Each step echoed unnaturally, the sound stretching into the shadows like a warning. In the central chamber, she discovered a massive array of machines, their purpose unclear. But among the tangled wires and ancient consoles, she found logs that confirmed her worst fears. Decades ago, the bunker had been used for experiments aimed at reaching the afterlife. Scientists had attempted to communicate with the dead using high-frequency radio waves, but the project had been abandoned after a series of unexplained deaths, or so the official reports claimed. The voices began again, louder and more insistent. Their tone had changed. It was no longer pleading, it was commanding. "You found us! You can free us!" The machinery around her roared to life, seemingly of its own accord. Screens displayed distorted faces, their mouths moving in silent screams. Evelyn's every instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't tear herself away. Something about the voices, their desperation, their fury, held her rooted in place. The entities grew stronger the more she listened. At first, they were confined to the radio and electronics, but soon they began to manifest physically. Shadows moved independently of any light source. Objects slid across surfaces without explanation. The air around her felt thick, oppressive, as though unseen eyes were watching her every move. Evelyn realized too late that she had become the conduit. The more she interacted with the frequency, the more the entities used her as a bridge to the physical world. And they weren't content with whispers and shadows, they wanted freedom. The final straw came one night when Evelyn's apartment became a battlefield of chaos. Lights flickered violently, her television blared static, and her computer screen displayed a single, chilling message: "Let us in." The temperature plummeted. Evelyn's breath fogged as the shadows coalesced into a humanoid form. Its features were indistinct, a shifting mass of darkness and static, but its presence was undeniable. "We're here!" it rasped, its voice a chorus of agony. Evelyn fled back to the bunker, hoping to shut down the machines and sever the connection. But the entities were ahead of her. The bunker was alive with their presence, the air vibrating with their whispers. Her flashlight flickered and died, leaving her in near total darkness punctuated by the glow of the machines. She reached the main console and frantically attempted to power it down, but the controls wouldn't respond. Her reflection in a nearby monitor twisted into a grotesque parody, its eyes hollow and accusing. "You can't stop us," the voices taunted. "We've waited too long." Desperate, Evelyn searched for another solution. She found a failsafe, a manual override that would destroy the equipment, but activating it would trap her in the bunker, ensuring she couldn't escape the entity's wrath. As the shadows closed in around her, Evelyn made her choice. With trembling hands, she pulled the lever. The machine sputtered and died. The bunker plunged into darkness. The whispers faded, replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment, she thought she had succeeded, but then a single voice echoed through the void. "We're not gone, we're with you now." Evelyn's body was found weeks later in the bunker, the equipment destroyed beyond repair. But those who examined the site reported strange phenomena, static-filled recordings on their devices, fleeting shadows in the corners of their vision, and whispers that seemed to call them by name. The frequency remained forgotten by the world, but for those who dared to listen, the voices waited, eager for another door to be opened.